So, Valentina, thank you so much for inviting me to your lovely studio in your
Pleasure.
home. And it's so nice to see you again after how many years? I think it's just 2 years, I think.
I think it was just 2 years because it was just before the first lockdown,
That's
wasn't
right.
it?
That's
Yes,
right.
at Southampton.
Yes, I interviewed you there for a piece that I wrote. I think I'd like to start off with sort of trying to find out where was the moment that you realized piano was going to be your career. Was there a moment or a series of moments where you realized that this was certain?
Well, I don't know whether there was a certain moment, but I'm sure I've already might have mentioned it, but I will say the story for other people that might have not read it. And it was when I was 6 years old, my parents bought a piano for my older sister, who was a cellist. And obviously, piano was obligatory instrument for any other instruments back in Bulgaria if you want to go to a specialized music school. And they bought Riga, that was a Soviet Union, obviously, a piano which was actually very, very good. It was based on the Blüthner mechanism. Anyway, so when the piano was delivered, I was absolutely fascinated, struck by the piano and making the sound that it did. And immediately I said to my parents that I wanted definitely to play the piano. And I thought in my mind, yes, I want to be a concert pianist because obviously I have been to many concerts beforehand. My mum and dad always took us to concerts and we were singing a lot. And my dad, who used to be a lecturer in a technical college, said, no, you haven't started school yet because it was at the age of 7 that you start school. He said, you've got to start school. You've got to prove to me that you can write and read and spell and do your maths. And then you can think about getting some piano lessons. Up to this point, you're not getting any piano lessons. So it took about a year and a half, and I was absolutely heartbroken that I couldn't have proper lessons. I mean, I was teaching myself, but that was no good. So so I knew at that moment I want to do that for the rest of my life. That was my love.
Reflecting back and looking at your father's reason for delaying the start of your lessons, did you look back and think he did the right thing, or?
I think so. I very often think that starting early, I mean, it's very individual. People are different, and for some people, starting very early is actually a good thing. It develops rhythm, etc., etc. For me, I already was doing quite a lot of singing, doing, harmonies with my mum and dad and my sister, traveling, say, to my dad's parents. In the car we'll be singing four-part harmonies and things like that. So I loved music anyway. So I think for some people, as I said, developing coordination, developing rhythm, listening skills and controlling voice, yes, starting at the age of 3 is a fantastic thing. But for some people, I guess it is much later in life. Much later, shouldn't be more than 6 years old. I regret that I didn't start at the age of 6, but I was fortunate enough to meet my professor at the age of 9, and he brought me to the standard and above the peers that my peers and friends that started at the age of 4 or 5. So, it's never too late to play a musical instrument.
Hear that, listeners? Never too late. It's never too late. Just touching on the singing 4-part harmonies. So your parents knew a bit about music, but they weren't professional musicians.
They were no professional musicians, but both of them sang in choirs, and they both loved music and classical music, especially. So yes, we used to do quite a lot of singing. I don't do it anymore, or most of my students know that I do when I teach, but I sing very badly.
I remember you telling me last time in our last interview that musical analysis and theory were your strengths. So was it something intuitive because you did it when you were very young? You were singing 4-part harmonies and.
I don't think that was the main reason. The main reason was that at the age of 18, going into 19, when the time came to apply to the music academy in Sofia Conservatoire, as we used to call it, there were two paths to go. One was instrumental department, and the other one was the theoretical department. There were basically 4 departments. You've got the vocal department, instrumental, and then you've got the theoretical, and then you've got the jazz, pop department. And I wanted, of course, because my heart is in piano and piano playing, I wanted to go instrumental department. And my professor at the time said, Valentina, look, you are very, very gifted. Well, he used to call me Valia because, people that are very close, they call me Valia. Yes, you are very, very gifted. You've proven you are gifted and you are very able pianist. However, there is a ceiling to one's talent. You can't exceed. You reach that ceiling and that's it. You are not, even if you're practicing 8 hours a day, you're not going to go any further. However, if you had a really secure theoretical background and knowledge about music in general, that is what's going to develop you as a pianist, as a musician. And, I was very rebellious. My heart was absolutely thinking, no, I don't want to go to the theoretical department. I don't want to be doing that. But then I thought, whatever my professor has said, he always has been right. And I did listen to him. And I did go to the theoretical department and studied the solfeggio, the theory of music, the history of music, the orchestration, reading orchestral score by sight, harmony, contrapoint, writing fugues, composition, you name it, everything that you've got to do in a theoretical department, and of course, music analysis. And that was the one that I really, really enjoyed. And after the third year, for the final 2 years, because it was a 5-year course, because the bachelor's and master's was part of the same thing, basically. You had to specialize. Quite a lot of people did conducting, obviously, had to do conducting as part of it. Quite a lot of people went and did solfeggio or history of music or harmony or whatever, and I definitely wanted to do music analysis, and that's what I specialized in my 4th and 5th year.
Did it come quite naturally to you, or did you have to sort of put a lot of hard work into it?
I think it did come naturally because the unusual thing was I was approaching the music analysis from a point of view of an interpreter and performer, whilst in most occasions it's the other way around. People who play the piano fairly well or any other instruments, they are looking a little bit more into the technicalities of the musical analysis, whilst actually I had the musical analysis helping me discover a piece or structure the interpretation of that piece. For example, I can give you a very short example,
yes, please.
And it is connected with my final thesis, which was it's called intonation. It's not intonation in English, it's not intonation. It's the interval structure of the melodies of Rachmaninoff and texture in his piano works. That's basically what I have been researching. And at the time, I was playing Moment Music Opus 16, all six of them, absolutely mad, and the other big suite, if you like, I was playing with Opus 3, which is the elegy, the famous C-sharp minor prelude, and melody, polychinelle, and serenade. Well, playing them as an entire suite is a different thing. If you're playing individual pieces, it's one thing. You focus on the structure of just the piece. But when you're playing 5 of them and presenting them to the audience, this is the challenge, because you've got to keep their attention. You can't put the emphasis on the C-sharp minor prelude because it's very dramatic, because it's just the second piece. What's going to happen to the 5th piece, you know? So what I thought was really, really essential at that point is to find the relation between the two pieces. Find where exactly the center of that suite is and really lead the audience towards it. And of course, how to do that? Well, you start exploring a little bit about, what are the themes there? Are there any relation between different ones? And I might play it very, very badly if I could, but in the elegy, you've got that middle section, which is that. So that beautiful cello melody. And now, in the Polichinelle, what have you got in the middle? Same. That's how you link everything, and it's just so absolutely amazing. Whether he planned it or did it come from the heart, that's a different story. But, you know, from an interpretation point of view, I find musical analysis very, very close to my heart and so important for any performer.
And would you say it's also good, even though if you don't play the set, it's always good to sort of analyze the pieces before and after of the piece you're learning, just to see the context of the music?
Absolutely. Right? Because, how would you know, about that piece unless you've explored the whole thing? It always applies to whether it's, for example, just playing the first movement of a concerto, which I've done very, very many times when I was younger. But if you don't know what happens in the second and the third movement, you don't really know what this entire piece is all about. And I always encourage my students to do that. And in fact, for performance classes, because the sets pieces for A-level music, whatever board we are doing, I think it's Edexcel. And they've got the pagodas. Well, pagodas, of course, is the first of 3 of their stamps. And very often, they would say, Valentina, would you play the pagodas for us? Because obviously listening to a tape, well, not tape, listening to a recording and listening to it live is quite a different experience. And very often I would say, no, I'm not going to play the pagodas. I'm going to play the Gardens under the Rain, Jardins sur le Pluie, because that's the third piece. And then you can see how the set actually opens with pagodas, which is just amazing, sort of like very reflective. And you can see, the shapes and the colors, and you get the flavor of that sort of Eastern culture. And then you move to Spain in the second one, and then the third one is that absolutely, amazing. I did touch the microphone.
It's
I hope I didn't do anything.
No, not to worry.
I didn't break it. You go to the Gardens under the Rain, which is such a beautiful, you close your eyes and you can hear the storm. You can hear the rainbow in that middle section. It's just absolutely tremendous set. So, yes, definitely, you should, or any performer should explore the context if they are embarking on playing a piece. Obviously, they don't need to play it, but at least listen to it and understand what it is all about and what the intentions of the composer were.
It's one of those things that once you do it, you can't go back, can't you? It's always something that's a habit now, isn't it?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, definitely.
Fantastic. You went to the, forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, the Pancho Vladigrov?
Pancho Vladigrov, yes,
Yep.
one of the most famous Bulgarian composers. Yes.
Can you tell us your development there? So maybe how you were when you entered the academy and how you were when you left. What was different between those two Valentinas?
Well, I don't know. I possibly can say, going back to an earlier sort of part of the conversation, that when I went there, although in the music school, specialized music school that I attended from the age of 13 to the age of 18, actually going into 19, we learned obviously musical analysis and history of music and harmony and quite a lot of theory, but the emphasis for me was predominantly obviously performing. So starting at the academy with having sufficient knowledge and taking it much deeper into areas that I wasn't so comfortable with. For example, orchestration or conducting, or reading orchestral score. Part of my exam was actually playing from sight Fourth Symphony, Tchaikovsky. That was a nightmare, I must admit. Now, I've passed my exam, I must admit, I actually looked at a piano reduction beforehand. I hope that Yovche Khrushchev is not looking at me and listening to this interview. But it's just, it's so intense, but the knowledge that you gain is amazing. Again, writing a fugue in polyphony, because you start, with easier structures, and the final exam is writing a fugue. I found that very, very challenging. But then you've done it, and then you open, any fugue, and you know exactly what's happening because you know the rules. Well, Bach, of course, breaks all of the rules, and everybody does, but at least you know what to expect. You know exactly, in what key each of the themes comes, in which voice, and what is the order, etc., etc. So it is such a wonderful knowledge, and I would recommend to anybody who wants to become an instrumentalist, a performer, to definitely spend a little bit more time on theory. I know that most of my students are trying to escape theory. Comes grade 6, oh, can I not do the grade 5 theory, please? Can I go to Trinity? And I'm saying, no, you can't. Because I still feel that, we've got to know a little bit more about the musical knowledge is really what is going to be in the basis for us to build up as performers.
Speaking about the relationship between knowing theory and performance, so has your skills in musical theory and analysis sort of improved your memory of performing music without the score, or was your memory quite good in the first place?
My memory was quite good because obviously in Bulgaria and many other countries, basically it's part of the piano tuition. Straight from the word go is to memorize. You read it once, you read it twice. By the third time, you've got to memorize it. In fact, I've said so many funny stories to some of my students about my professor that if you don't go, or it was any professor basically, you go to your second lesson, and by the second lesson, if you haven't memorized the piece, basically you're thrown out of the window, go back home, learn it, and come back.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, well, it was very sort of like strict regime. And I think in a way it needs to be strict because I don't agree that everything needs to be memorized. Obviously, there's so many big pieces that you can't physically memorize everything, but it is very, very good if you have memorized the piece. I'm sure you know it yourself. You can sort of like close your eyes and you can see the whole piece. Otherwise, if you keep on reading, well, you're not reading. You've already memorized it, but you want to have that sort of comfort, you know, the music there. You can't quite sort of like from the top see everything. So I always encourage my students to start memorizing. They don't need to get rid of the music completely. If they can, would be wonderful. In fact, I was very, very happy with my student who played the Rachmaninoff second piano concerto, the finale, the other day. I said to him, George, are you going to use the score? And he said, no, I'm not reading it anymore. And I said, yeah, good for you. So played by memory. And he did, to his credit. And luckily, because it was open air concert and the wind was very strong, I thought, goodness me, it's really, really good that, you know, we didn't have the score, because can you imagine? Because all of the pages were sort of like falling and so there we are. But definitely memorization is very, very important. However, I don't know about the memory, but musical analysis, I feel, is very important from a point of view, something that I've said earlier in the conversation about the structure of the piece and how you would interpret it. Now, we're going to a little bit lesser known composers, and I did. My first recording was of Joachim Raff's piano sonatas. And apparently, there was a performance of the Fantasy Sonata some years before, somewhere in France, and the members of the Joachim Raff Society have heard it, somebody obviously performing it. And when my CD came out, one of the I think it was I don't know, the president or whatever of the Rachmaninoff Society, of the Raff Society, said to me, "I've listened to that piece, but so and so was taking the tempos much faster. However, I listened to the end of that piece when you performed it, and I was absolutely convinced your tempo was the right one, because the very opening and the very ending." They were the arch. It was like a house. You know, the two walls of the house, or four walls of the house, they were the same. They weren't like one bigger, one smaller, and the roof falling. So I think from that point of view, music analysis is so, so important, because that makes you realize, actually, sometimes the tempi that you listen others performing might not be what they should be, and you make it your own, of course, and you can convince people that you're right. I'm not saying I'm right, but I can convince people that I'm right.
Yeah, I was just about to say, there's a point that you mentioned, being able to be at the top and see everything that's going on at the bottom, you know, the musical structures. I remember my piano teacher, James Kirby, once saying to me, he was talking about Sviatoslav Richter.
Oh, yes.
And his performance interpretations. And I remember him exactly saying that Richter was like a bird, like a hawk, an eagle, flying over the mountains. And when he's flying over, he can see all the details of the mountains, where the rivers are, where the mountain slopes, all the trees, everything, all the animals. And that just really, really changed my mind about how I should interpret music. Be the person at the top, this powerful figure.
Absolutely, beautifully described.
Yeah, I just never forgot it. And so that's just the point I wanted to make when you mentioned about it. It just reminded me about that.
Yes. I always definitely I say, yes, you need to memorize, because as you said, it's really, really important. Unfortunately, with age, memory is not improving, but then there are other things, as you said, about music analysis. You know exactly in what key you are, where you're modulating. All of that is there. So I always say to my students, look, there isn't just the muscular memory that you have developed by repeating and repeating again. There is obviously the visual memory, because the moment you sort of glance, you know exactly where you are. It's almost like you've been somewhere. I've been, say, in Berlin, and I have got that picture in my mind, and I still can take myself back to that place. It's the same about music. I know exactly where in the left hand I've got that key or whatever. So visual memory, and then the most important is obviously the oral analytical memory. You know at every single point which note there is in the hand, and that is the one that you can rely on.
Yeah. Has musical theory and analysis helped you in any way with composition? Have you tried composing at all? Has it helped you?
Right. Well, I had to do obviously composing in the academy, but my first attempt in composing was actually in the specialized music school. And obviously being born and raised in communist time, you had to follow tasks and homework sets and, projects and things, because obviously there are about 200 musicians waiting for your place. If you don't do them, they basically just get rid of you. So one of the things that I had to do, and I think I was in my second year, so it will be the equivalent, I think, of like year 8 or something, or 7 or 8, fairly young. And one of the things was they said that composition competition in the school, and every single student had to write a composition. Well, I've never written a composition. Well, I've improvised on, but not as such writing a composition. So I had to do it, and I was sort of like postponing it because I didn't have a clue what I'm doing, but I was told I've got to do it. So I came with ingenious idea. Because I couldn't think of two hands what to compose at the time, I was playing Opus 9 Scriabin, it's only for left hand. So I thought, right, I'm going to do a composition for left hand, and I called it Etude Poem for the Left Hand. And actually, it was quite successful. I did it like 24 hours before the deadline because I knew I've got to do it. So I did it. And don't ask me to write it. I possibly still have got the original somewhere in my books over there. And funnily enough, it actually won second place of the whole school, which was absolutely amazing. I guess probably nobody else thought of writing just for left hand. I think that's why it won. But no, actually, going back, it was quite a nice and very innocent, composition. Lots of, tonics and dominants, the usual things, few diminished chords, but everything, combined in the left hand, the melody and big arpeggiated sort of like texture accompaniment. It was quite nice. Anyway.
So was Scriabin the reason you chose the left hand, or did you have another reason for choosing the left hand only?
I think that was just inspired by Scriabin. I must admit that Scriabin, as well as Rachmaninoff, as well as many other composers, they are very, very close to my heart. And Scriabin was definitely one of the composers that captured my imagination. The fact that he wrote as his opus 2 that famous C-sharp minor etude at the age of 14, and you think it's just incredible. The depth of the feeling, it's just wonderful. So that immediately tells you, oh, what else did he write? And then you start exploring, and you can see where he started at Opus 2, where he went in the middle, like opus 20 something or 30 something, and then at the end, opus 60, whatever, he is away, completely different style. And that is so, so interesting actually to learn about and explore as a performer.
Before we move on to recordings, you said that Scriabin wrote the C sharp etude at 14 years old.
Yes.
It's such a... There's no other word to describe it. It's just so much pain within every note, within every chord, within every harmonic progression. And it's surprising that a 14-year-old, someone so young, can convey so much in notes.
Absolutely.
And there's also some pianists who are quite young who convey so much mature emotions. Where do you think this comes from? Do you reckon it's their unique childhood environment, the way their parents brought them up, their family surroundings, maybe the political situation affected this sort of maturity in such a young age?
I'm sure all of those things that you mentioned, they do definitely, help in a way with the maturity of interpretation. However, I feel that, very often we say, read books to find more about the world. Play music. I think because of the repertoire that we play. And that was one of the things that I actually thought of saying. I don't know whether my strength is actually piano playing or is it music in general. I think music was the one that basically captures one's imagination, even at a very early age. You see things, you see colors, you see shapes, you see pictures, you have got feelings, and you feel those feelings, and you can hear to a storytelling, and also you express yourself through playing the music. You can you feel you're happy or sad, you're desperate, or all of those things you can actually put into the music. And of course, all of those things, you interpret them from the black notes on the white paper. And I think that is possibly where lots and lots of children or younger performers, they get their depth and in the expression, although, as you said, very, very young. I think that's what it is. It is the music that brings that maturity, I guess. I don't know whether I said it well, but yeah, that's what I think it is. It is the music itself. It makes you stronger.
Right. So not the other way around. Not maturity brings music, but the music brings maturity.
That's how I feel it is.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Yes. Maybe it is wrong, but that is my feeling.
Sure.
Yes. As you said, at the age of... now, what was the name of that very, very young composer? Anna, was it Anna? I can't remember. She's English. And she wrote those piano...
yes.
Yes. Isn't that incredible? Where does that come from? Definitely, that maturity. And I think, but she played at the age of, when did she start?
Very young.
Yeah,
Very
2
young.
or 3 years old. So I guess it's one of those things. I'm just trying maybe to prove my point, but I still think, yes, maturity definitely has got a big role to play, because maturity brings much more experience. So that's a good thing growing old. You don't need to practice so much. Why? Because you know how to practice.
Yes, exactly.
Joking, anyway.
Great. Well, moving swiftly on, you've had a very, very successful recording career.
Oh, thank you.
The most recent collaboration was, correct me if I pronounce this not the right way, Corentin Bossier.
Yes, it
correct?
is.
The award-winning French composer. You recorded 2 piano concertos and a second piano concerto called the Passionata.
So basically, the 2 piano concertos. The first one is Philip Marlowe, and then there was the other concerto and also the piano sonata. So there are 2 piano concertos, and the piano sonata is called Appassionata. Yes.
Yes. I was wondering if you could tell us the story of your connection between Corentin and Bossier. How did you meet, and how did you have this professional relationship?
Well, that is a very interesting story. I'm sure many of the audience that might be watching this conversation already know about how I found and how I channeled myself discovering, playing, and recording, and obviously performing long forgotten composers and works. Now, that was through Gareth Vaughan, my music producer, who is incredibly knowledgeable, a person who introduced me to those composers. Well, funnily enough, Gareth was the link, because when we were planning, well, it still hasn't happened, a second concert in Cadogan Hall he wanted to do at some point, a concert there, but this time, rather than playing as a soloist of an orchestra, to do a solo concert. He was saying, you can include anything that you have recorded, performed, etc., etc. And why don't you include work by a very young composer called Corentin Bossier? And I didn't know anything about him. And he said, we'll get in touch with Corentin and he can send you few links, and the music. And Corentin was very, very kind, to send me few bits and pieces. And I thought, oh, goodness me, that is quite something for such a young person. I mean, he's only born 95. Just incredible. I'm looking to that side because there is actually his CD over there.
Yes, I'll show you that later.
So Corentin was in touch and he was asking me after, he sent me a few links. He thought, oh, what do you think? And I thought, yes, there are quite a few works I would be interested. Also, they sit beautifully with the romantic spirit and the romantic sort of music that I love and I record, although obviously post-romantic. But anyway, so we were just planning. The concert hasn't happened as yet, but hopefully one day it will. And then I forgot all about it. I mean, obviously continuing, keeping in touch with Gareth. And then all of a sudden, Corentin got in touch with me and saying, are you interested in recording my 2 piano concertos and my second piano sonata? Now, my idea for recording the concertos is to record them with John McLachlan Williams, who is a fantastic Grammy winning violinist and conductor from the States, and record them in Ukraine. And I'm thinking, that is just, incredible. And I said, well, can I take a look at the concertos, because he was talking like in 6 months record everything, and I'm thinking, really? So anyway, he sent me the music. Definitely very, very challenging, but beautiful. So yes, I did say yes, and obviously the result is there, and it is gathering really, really good reviews. I'm especially thrilled for Corentin, who is very, very young, and many obviously critics might dismiss that sort of post-romantic type style of composing nowadays, but there is so much to explore of any sort of style, whether it's a post-romantic or post-classical or whatever. It is really, it's a composer that is going to make it, obviously accessible to the listener, and it is for the composer to present it in a way that the audience likes it. And it's, of course, the content. And he is a really, really amazing composer. So I'm thrilled for him that it got very, very good reviews.
What do you think about more contemporary works? Have you played more, say, experimental piano works? What do you think about those?
Unfortunately, I haven't actually played so much of these. There are actually reasons why, because when I was brought up and I studied in Bulgaria, most of the music that was studied obviously was up to a certain point, because we didn't want the Western bad influence. So quite a lot of the music that obviously everybody is raised up here in this country was almost forbidden. In fact, I do remember about from our harmony professor who was once arrested because he was listening to jazz. But it's one of those things, those were the rules, and if you don't play by the rules, you might be, top professor or very gifted musician. Yes, you can be sent, and there has been so many cases where people were sent to camps, etc., etc., which is absolutely heartbreaking. But so that's my point, was that obviously I haven't been brought up with much of the contemporary sort of like style of music because it was not really available as such. But after the obviously collapse of communism, there was more and more sort of like information appearing, and obviously in the digital age, obviously I moved here 23 years ago, and we have got so much more information, and I haven't really attempted. Do you know, one's life is not enough to do everything and to actually explore everything.
Yeah.
And I think, in a way, a few years ago, I did realize I would love to play all of the Beethoven sonata, everything Debussy, or everything Bach, etc., etc. But I'm thinking, getting at the age I am, I'm thinking, actually, I want to play music that I love and I enjoy. And possibly that's why sometimes people say, well, why don't you include those Schubert impromptus? I would love to, but the satisfaction comes from actually finding something new and researching it. And basically, it's almost like giving birth. You see those, black dots on the white paper, interpret them and make them actually live through an interpretation and through a performance, which is such a wonderful feeling. And I think that is the reason why I focus on maybe a little bit not so much mainstream composers.
Just before we go to sort of studying lesser known composers, do you think, reflecting back on music that you studied, do you think your musical identity made it difficult to connect well with Western musicians who were brought up on Bach, Chopin, Beethoven? Because did you study?
Yeah, actually, no, definitely not. Because don't forget that back in Bulgaria, as well as Russia, and I would say probably most of the Eastern, part, the communist part of Europe, there was a mainstream, always we've been brought up with mainstream composers.
Right.
So it was definitely, if you're doing final, well, at end of the year exam, you will be playing Bach, either Prelude and Fugue or French Suite or any polyphonic, work. Then you continue with sonata. It's going to be either Haydn or Mozart or Beethoven, and then the romantic piece, and then the most contemporary that you can find, and a Bulgarian piece. So it was all structured. So, but not really. I mean, okay, for example, everybody possibly knows of Philip Glass. I didn't know of Philip Glass until I came here. So it was interesting to discover that sort of music. It's not that it's appealing to me, but it is something that I need to know as a musician. It's part of our heritage now, so we should know about all of those composers and music, obviously.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the word discover. That's a very good transition word. With the composers that you've recorded, so Raf and
Ruzitsky, yeah.
So composers like these, which are composers you don't really see on programs these days. It's mainly just Schubert and Chopin and Beethoven. How do you discover these composers? Was it through tip-offs that people give, or accidental discoveries? How did you find these composers?
Well, it's the actual physical discovery. I must admit, it's not mine, because very often it would be basically music or composers that have been sort of like, in a way, introduced. I'm sure that most of you know the story about Gareth Vaughan. I'm mentioning him again because when I came to this country in 98, basically 99, I was doing some concerts in the New Theatre Hall, where he was manager of the New Theatre Hall at the time down in Portsmouth. And basically, he has noticed that I had a bit more unusual repertoire, which actually was unusual for Bulgaria. For example, you weren't going to be playing, say, Scriabin, what I was doing. You were more meant to be playing something else. But my professor has been absolutely amazing and so accommodating with my repertoire. He always encouraged me to play things that I like, and maybe they're not so much mainstream. So Gareth Vaughan was the one that introduced me to Raf. Basically, after one of my concerts, he said, "Valentina, do you know of Joachim Raf?" And I said, "Yes, because I studied in my history of music in the academy. He was associate of Liszt, blah, 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 blah." I said everything that I knew. And he said, "Have you listened to his music?" No, there was not a single note that I've ever heard in my life, because there were no recordings at the time in the early 90s. And he said, "Well, I've got some music, and probably the music is somewhere there. I can show you."
Yeah.
And he brought me that music, and he said, "Well, why don't you take it home and maybe just explore, take a look." And yes, it was obviously few days, or even it might have been months, when I sort of thought, I will take a look. And I started reading that sonata. It was the Grand Sonata. I wouldn't forget that moment. And I just couldn't stop. Okay, I was reading it badly, I must admit, because the fourth movement is a fugue. Well, can you sight read a fugue? I can't. So, I'm joking. Well, no, I'm not joking. It is very, very hard. But it was such a wonderful discovery that there is music which is so amazing and so well written and pianistically fantastic. And it hasn't been played. And I'm thinking, goodness me, why is that happening? Anyway, so I rang Gareth and he said, "So what do you think?" Well, I said, "Well, I basically have been glued to the piano playing that music, and it's just amazing." And he said, "Would you like to record it?" And that's basically started it. Now, because of that Raf CD, most of my Polish recordings, the ones that done for Acte Prealable, were very much due to the fact that the manager of the Acte Prealable, he basically received that CD or sort of purchased it or whatever was the case, and he listened to it and he said, right, she is the one that I want to perform some of the music, because now Jan Jarnicki is the name of the manager, and he is absolutely amazing person. He is Polish, obviously, but he had problems with communists, etc., etc. He escaped pretty much into France. He studied there. Completely different. He's not a musician. He studied something to do with, I don't know, computers. It was in the very, very early sort of stages of computers and, you know, hardware. It used to be at that point, I think, for computers in the 70s, 80s. And when, obviously, Poland, sort of like the communist regime collapsed, he decided to go back to Poland and find all of the music that everybody is thinking, what happened? You know, you've got Chopin, you've got obviously Szymanowski later on. What happened to all of that music? Nothing for about 100 years, you know. And he started researching, and he has been researching obviously in libraries and everywhere around the world to find all of that Polish music. So he introduced me actually to Noskowski, and he said, is it something that you might be interested? Very similar sort of approach. Here is some music, you know, tell me what you think. Because he said, I'm not a musician, but I would love to record everything that a Polish composer has written. Isn't that absolutely admirable? It's just incredible, guy. Anyway, so that was Noskowski, and then after Noskowski it was Różycki that I was recording. So I guess one recording leads to another one. People get to know you and trust you in a way that you do hopefully a good job out of all of those interpretations. And I guess in a way they trust me because they can see that, you know, I do analyze things, I research things from music point of view, how to structure my interpretation, performance, etc., etc. So that's how all sort of was building up, and how all of those recordings came about.
And if I remember correctly, what you just said, Raf was an associate to Liszt. So has your sort of relationship with Raf changed the way you see Liszt? Does that have that effect? So finding these lesser composers in the contemporary of, say, Liszt or Chopin, has it affected your view on them?
It's interesting. I mean, always I would say there are many composers that are overplayed. And Liszt is one of them, because I think lots of people think playing Liszt is the ultimate goal because it's so difficult. But, do you know, actually, I always thought of Liszt that he was a bit of a character, and not always I've been a great fan of his music from a point of view that is a bit of show off. But there's some absolutely amazing works. I mean, it is show off because he was able to obviously compose music for the level of his playing, which was obviously incredible. But it did change my mind from he's a bit show off and not much of a depth into some of the pieces that he wrote. I actually saw Liszt in a different way when Gareth told me the story. Now, Gareth is so knowledgeable. He does quite a lot of writing for the booklets for Hyperion and all of the big, labels, because he graduated from Oxford with music and English. So he is full of knowledge when it comes to, any composers, whether they are better or less known. Anyway, he told me the story because obviously he read it in one of the memoirs, where how Raf became associate of Liszt. It was Raf who was a great admirer of Liszt. But of course, being a student and being very, very poor, he couldn't attend many of the concerts that were hundreds of miles away or whatever, or didn't have the money, obviously, to afford. So what happened was he heard that Liszt is performing somewhere within, I think it was either 20 or 30 kilometers distance down, and he said, I'm going to go, but he didn't have money, so he walked. And guess what? At that time, it was just happening that the heavens opened, and it has been raining. So he arrived at the venue where Liszt was giving that concert, and he was absolutely, as he was describing, dripping, and puddle around me, he said, when he arrived. And somebody actually told Liszt about what Raf did, walking through that rain, etc., just to go and see his idol. And he said, okay, he's going to come and sit next to me at the piano. Well, that's quite something. Liszt, who was very, egocentric, whatever is the word, basically allowing somebody to be, to get basically to sit next to him and not him being the center of attention. That is quite something. That's what changed my mind. And actually, he did. Raf basically was sitting and he was saying there was a puddle of water around me that was, basically, and I was still dripping, but it was the most amazing experience in my life. So that changed my view on Liszt. He obviously did care. He was deeply, actually, a wonderful person, although he might have been a show-off or whatever. But I thought that was quite something, to share the stage, to share the experience with that guy who have been walking, about 30 kilometers or something, just to be there and to listen. Quite remarkable.
Well, thank you very much for telling that story. I think that's a powerful testimony to knowing the history about something can really change your mind about a particular composer. Well, thank you so much for telling that. Just a last question. I wish I could talk to you for many hours.
I know. I thought last question, what's that?
Just to round it off, just maybe something fun or something introspective. Is there or are there any musical projects that you haven't done yet in your musical career that you'd like to do? Something that's filled with fiery passion.
Well, there are always goals. I think when the goals finish, that's where the musician is dead. So I think I always have got sort of like projects and things that I want to do. Whether I can achieve that, that's a different story. But talking of Rózsicki, I've done 2 CDs, and actually there is a third one, or music for a third CD, and I'm absolutely desperate to go and do that and to accomplish, such as I know I've recorded everything by Rózsicki, especially because unfortunately Jan was diagnosed with quite a health problem, and I'm thinking, yes, I need to do that, whilst he's still with us, such as he can enjoy it, because he has been absolutely amazing in what he does and what he brings to the world as knowledge. But anyway, so that is one of the things that I would love to do. There is another project that I've been working recently on. It's a female composer, and we were meant to record actually me playing solo works and some works with cello. A good friend and musician of mine, Michel Etzkan, we were going to go to France last year, May, to record Cecilia's works for cello piano and predominantly solo piano. But unfortunately, because of obviously COVID, that never happened, and it is getting, it's still very, very difficult to see how that is going to be possible, how to record, etc., and what will be the logistics. But yes, loads and loads of projects. For example, I would love to do more concerts, but again, you know, with the COVID, keep fingers crossed. There are a little bit more sort of like things. More performances happening, which is great to see. So I'm very much hoping that there are at the moment only 2 concerts in my diary, but I hope that both of them happen. One is with Saint-Saëns No. 2 and Petersfield Orchestra in March as part of the Petersfield Festival, and I've got one with Catherine Lawler, who we are recording for Willow Haynes Records. A CD series, I think, is going to be Myths and Legends. So it is basically, the title is all self-explanatory, finding works which are based on myths and legends. And there's so much. In fact, we discovered, thanks to Gareth, obviously, a suite written by Otto Malink. And it is absolutely stunning music. It's not the easiest to play, but I'm thinking, why hasn't that been performed? You know, it's one of those things. One wonders. But yes, lots of projects, and I hope I still continue having some projects in my mind, because as I said, once the wish of projects and doing things is gone, I'm thinking, that's not a good sign, unfortunately.
Well, Valentina, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.